Now we will be discussing zoonotic diseases, and this is found in Chapter 40 of our Mahon textbook. Zoonotic infections can be transmitted by scratches, bites, and other contact with domestic or wild animals. These diseases, microorganisms, jump naturally from animals to humans, and they can cause a real problem. The first one we're going to talk about is pasteurellosis. The most common culprit is Pasteurella multocida. The reservoirs are the oral cavities of dogs and cats. The clinical manifestations, these can come from bites or scratches of dogs or cats, and they can also, you can get this from animals licking infected wounds. This is rarely infections occur in the absence of scratches or bites, and so these serious problems such as sepsis are very rare. Next is erysipelathrix. Let me try that again. Erysipelathrix erosiopathiae. This is primarily seen in pigs, poultry, fish, and crustaceans, but mostly pigs. It's isolated from contaminated soil and water, and this is known as fish handler's disease. There are three clinical manifestations. There's an infection of an abrasion of the hand or fingers from handling infected animals or animal products, and then there's also a diffuse cutaneous form. Then we have Capnocytophaga canamorsis. The standout here is that it's a normal inhabitant of canine and feline oral flora. Most patients that have a problem with this bacteria have predisposing factors such as they've had their spleen removed, or cancers, or drug abuse. Cat scratch disease is caused by Bartonella hensley. It's the most common. It can also be caused by bites from arthropod vectors like fleas, ear mites, or ticks from canines. Now we're going to talk about the zoonotic infections transmitted by direct contact or inhalation. Anthrax is first up. It is caused by Bacillus anthracis. It's also known as wool sorter's disease, and it can cause a malignant pustule. It occurs in all the U.S. states, primarily in grazing animals, and it comes from spores in the grasses. Vaccines are available for humans and cattle that can be used in people with high-risk occupations. The clinical manifestations of anthrax, there are three different ones. We can have cutaneous anthrax, which is the most common form, where the spores enter through wounds, and it forms a painless black sore that heals without scarring. Gastrointestinal anthrax is from ingestion of contaminated meats. They enter in the lesion of the intestines, and you can get septicemia. Pulmonary or inhalation anthrax is from inhaling spores, and you can get septicemia and die within 24 hours without treatment. Tularemia is caused by Francisella tularensis. It is transmitted through the cottontail rabbits and the jackrabbits. It is a strictly aerobic gram-negative bacillus. There are two different biotypes, and it causes a fever with flu-like illness. And if you have typhoidal tularemia, it is highly fatal. Then we have brucellosis, which is also known as undulant fever. There are 4 different species that can cause brucellosis. Brucella melitensis, abortus, canis, and suis. We've already talked about these before. And we get these through exposure to urine or milk of infected animals. The clinical manifestations include wounds where the organisms have entered, and we get chills, fever, sweating, weakness, and fatigue, so nothing really stand out. Leptospirosis, you talked about this with your teacher in parasitology, It's found, you get this with contact with contaminated soil or urine. Rodents are the primary reservoir. It can get in your eye. It enters through the skin or mucous membranes. And there is an anicteric biphase disease where you have a sudden temperature spike, severe headache, vivid pink eyes, and then the icteric leptospirosis, which is also called Wheels syndrome. And this is a severe form of leptospirosis where you see hemolysis, jaundice, and renal failure. Here's what we could see under the microscope for Leptospira. Now we're going to talk about arthropod vectors of zoonotic illnesses. Yersinia pestis is probably the first thing that comes to mind. It is endemic to southwestern United States. Rats are the natural host. Vectors are fleas. The life cycle involves fleas biting and regurgitating the bacilli into the bite wound. Gross. Clinical manifestations, you can have either buboes from bubonic plague, which are painful swollen lymph nodes, or pneumonic plague, which is usually as a result of septicemia and can be passed from person to person in blood containing respiratory aerosols. And here's a picture of the flea that can carry Yersinia pestis. Lyme disease is caused by Borrelia burgdorferi. The white-footed mice are the natural host. Ticks are the vectors, and this was discovered in Old Lyme, Connecticut, and seen as juvenile arthritis. The life cycle, the tick again bites and regurgitates the spirochete into the wound, and the Ixodes damini tick is what transmits Lyme disease, so you may need to know that. It also causes a bullseye rash, and in late stages, arthritis. So here is the spirochete. And then here is our bullseye rash, also known as erythema migrans. Rickettsia causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And there are different types of spotted fevers. So Rocky Mountain spotted fever is one of those. Then there's the typhus group, which is there's endemic typhus, also known as murine typhus. There is Rickettsia prowazekii, which is also known as Brill-Zinsser disease. I don't think you would need to know that. Endemic typhus, not so much important here. I don't think you would be asked anything about this. There is human ehrlichiosis, and then the emerging zoonosis that we need to briefly be aware of or discuss is SARS in 2003. Boy, that's come back around. And then the avian flu, the bird flu, swine flu, H1N1 that's always going around, E. coli 104H4. And the causes are the explosive population growth and international trade, and I would say travel as well. And that concludes our discussion of zoonotic infections.